10 Golden Age stars who always cheated on their wives. Hollywood's Golden Age gave us the most iconic leading men in cinema history, dashing, debonair gentlemen who embodied America's ideals of masculinity and honor. But behind those million-dollar smiles and carefully tailored suits lurked Hollywood's dirtiest open secret. These weren't just actors playing romantic leads. They were serial philanderers whose real-life exploits would have made their on-screen characters blush with shame. The studio system didn't just build these men into stars, it actively covered up their indiscretions, paying off witnesses, bribing police, and planting false stories to maintain their wholesome public images. What you're about to discover isn't in the official biographies or sanitized documentaries. This is the unfiltered truth about the men millions of women fantasized about, never knowing that their real-life behavior betrayed everything they appeared to stand for on screen. From secret children to hotel room scandals, from starlets pressured into silence to wives left humiliated at home, these aren't just occasional indiscretions. These are systematic patterns of betrayal by men who couldn't stay faithful if their careers depended on it. And sometimes they did.
Can it be possible that...
It won't be possible, Red.
that you've grown a woman's heart, a real woman's heart?
1. Clark Gable, the king of infidelity. Clark Gable wasn't just the king of Hollywood, he was the undisputed emperor of infidelity. With his trademark smirk and those prominent ears that somehow only enhanced his devastating charm, Gable conquered the box office and the bedroom with equal aplomb. He played honorable men on screen, but lived like a wolf in a tuxedo. It was an open secret at MGM that no female co-star was safe from Gable's advances. From the moment he established himself as a leading man, Gable's sexual appetites became legendary among industry insiders. His conquests included nearly every leading lady he worked with and countless women behind the scenes. Clark had a system, revealed one former MGM employee. On the first day of production, he'd identify his target, usually his leading lady. By the end of the first week, he'd made his move. It was so routine that some directors would actually plan their shooting schedules around when they expected the affair to begin. His long-running affair with Joan Crawford spanned multiple films and years, their chemistry burning as intensely off-screen as on. Despite both being married to others, their relationship was so obvious that crew members would know not to enter certain trailers when both stars were preparing for scenes. But the most scandalous of Gable's affairs resulted in a secret that Hollywood managed to keep under wraps for decades. His liaison with Loretta Young during the filming of Call of the Wild in 1935 resulted in a pregnancy that Young desperately tried to conceal. She temporarily disappeared from public view, secretly gave birth to Gable's daughter, then staged an elaborate adoption of her own child to avoid the career-ending scandal. "The studio fixers worked overtime on that situation," said one former publicist. Louis B. Mayer himself coordinated the cover-up. Loretta was essentially forced to adopt her own daughter and pretend she'd never been pregnant. What makes Gable's behavior particularly striking is that it continued even during his marriage to Carole Lombard, widely considered the great love of his life. Though their relationship is often portrayed as Hollywood's perfect romance, cut short only by Lombard's tragic death in a 1942 plane crash, even this great love wasn't enough to reform Hollywood's most notorious womanizer. After Lombard's death, Gable's womanizing intensified, as if he were trying to numb his grief through serial conquests. His subsequent marriages were punctuated by numerous affairs, creating a pattern that continued until his death in 1960. 2. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler who never left his sword at home. If Hollywood created a dictionary, womanizer would be illustrated with Errol Flynn's rakish grin. The dashing Australian actor who defined the swashbuckler genre wasn't just playing a rogue on screen, he embodied the role so completely that his name literally became synonymous with seduction. The expression, "in like Flynn," entered the American lexicon as shorthand for sexual success. The swashbuckler never left his sword at home. Flynn's conquests weren't counted in dozens or even hundreds. By some accounts, including his own boastful estimates, the number reached into the thousands. From Hollywood starlets to hotel maids, from society women to underage fans, Flynn's appetite knew no bounds of propriety, morality, or even legality. Errol didn't just cheat, he made it his life's mission, revealed one Warner Brothers crew member. He would literally schedule his day around his conquests. The studio would build in extra time during productions because they knew Errol would disappear for meetings that everyone understood were actually rendezvous with various women. Flynn's predatory behavior extended to underage girls, leading to perhaps the most serious scandal of his career. In 1942, he was charged with statutory assault of two teenage girls, Peggy Satterley and Betty Hansen, aged 17 and 16 respectively. The subsequent trial became a media sensation, with Flynn's attorney successfully discrediting the victims and securing an acquittal. The studio paid enormous sums to manage that situation, claimed one former Warner Brothers executive. Beyond the legal defense, there were payoffs to witnesses, bribes to police officers to lose certain evidence, and a massive publicity campaign to portray Flynn as the victim of gold diggers. Flynn's marriages to actresses Lily DeMita, Nora Eddington, and Patrice Wymore were all punctuated by constant infidelities. He made no serious attempt to conceal his affairs, often brazenly pursuing other women at public events while his wife was present. As Flynn aged, his behavior became increasingly pathetic rather than dashing. His looks faded due to heavy drinking and drug use, yet his predatory habits continued. In his final years, he was a shadow of his former self, trading on fading fame for sexual favors that increasingly had to be purchased rather than charmed out of willing partners.
Good morning.
Oh, hello.
Are you getting your exercise?
No, just scrubbing the steps.
I came to congratulate you.
3. Frank Sinatra, the voice that melted hearts and ruined marriages. Frank Sinatra didn't just have a voice that made women swoon. He had a libido that made marriages crumble, including his own. From his earliest days as a skinny crooner to his later years as the chairman of the board, Sinatra approached infidelity with the same dedication he brought to his music: practice, practice, practice. His voice melted hearts, and his zipper ruined marriages. Sinatra's first marriage to Nancy Barbato began with apparent devotion but quickly descended into a pattern of chronic infidelity. As his star rose, so did his appetite for sexual conquest, with Sinatra taking full advantage of the endless stream of adoring female fans that his fame attracted. Frank was insatiable, recalled one musician who toured with him in the 1940s. After shows, he'd have his people line up girls outside his dressing room. He'd point to the ones he wanted, and they'd be brought in one after another. Nancy was home with the kids while Frank was working his way through a lineup like he was at a buffet. The most notorious of Sinatra's affairs during his first marriage was with actress Ava Gardner, a passion so intense and public that it eventually ended his marriage to Nancy. The irony? After leaving his first wife to marry Gardner, Sinatra promptly continued his philandering ways, cheating on Ava just as he had on Nancy. With Ava, it was different only because she fought back, said one Hollywood insider. She wasn't going to sit at home like Nancy did. When she caught wind of Frank's affairs, which was often, she'd have explosive confrontations with him. Then she'd have her own affairs to get even. It was mutually assured destruction. Their volatile relationship, fueled by jealousy, passion, and alcohol, became Hollywood legend. They separated multiple times before finally divorcing in 1957, with Gardner famously saying, "He's a man of 1,000 faces. The women with whom he's been unfaithful know 999 of them." Sinatra's subsequent marriages to actresses Mia Farrow and Barbara Marx followed the same pattern. Even as he aged into his 50s, 60s, and beyond, Sinatra maintained a rotating cast of mistresses, showgirls, and one-night stands. His position as an entertainment powerhouse made it easy for him to pursue and discard women with minimal consequences. The entourage around Frank was largely dedicated to facilitating his affairs, revealed a former assistant. Someone to make the initial approach to women Frank had his eye on, someone to arrange the hotel rooms, someone to handle the gifts and payoffs afterward. It was a well-oiled machine designed to keep a constant supply of new women coming through his bedroom door. What makes Sinatra's infidelities particularly noteworthy is how they contrasted with his carefully crafted public image as a romantic idol. While he sang love songs that touched millions, his actual treatment of the women in his life reflected anything but romance. The man who could express such tenderness through music showed remarkably little in his personal relationships. The great irony was that women fell in love with Frank's voice, with the emotion he conveyed in songs like "I've Got You Under My Skin" or "All the Way," observed one colleague. But the real Frank saw women as disposable pleasures. not as the objects of the devotion he sang about so convincingly.
Mr. Jameson. Mr. Jameson.
What are you doing in my bedroom? Get out of here.
4. Spencer Tracy, The Secret Life of Hollywood's Conscience. Spencer Tracy represented moral authority on screen, the judge, the priest, the principled everyman whose integrity guided audiences through complex ethical dilemmas. Off-screen, however, Tracy lived a double life that completely contradicted his public persona, carrying on one of Hollywood's longest-running extramarital affairs while technically remaining married until his death. He stayed married for appearances, but his heart and body belonged to someone else. Tracy married Louise Treadwell in 1923, and they had 2 children together, including a son who was diagnosed as deaf shortly after birth. When Tracy's career took him to Hollywood and fame, Louise largely remained in the East, focusing on raising their son and eventually establishing a school for deaf children. This geographical separation created both opportunity and cover for Tracy's eventual infidelities. The most famous of these, of course, was his decades-long relationship with Katharine Hepburn, which began during the filming of Woman of the Year in 1941 and continued until Tracy's death in 1967. While this relationship is often romanticized as one of Hollywood's greatest love stories, the uncomfortable truth remains. It was a 26-year affair conducted while Tracy remained married to another woman. It was the studio's best-kept open secret, said one MGM insider. Everyone knew about Spencer and Kate, but no one discussed it publicly. The Catholic Church was still enormously influential, and Tracy was one of their most prominent members in Hollywood. A divorce would have been scandalous, and possibly career-ending. Tracy's Catholicism created a convenient excuse for never divorcing his wife, allowing him to maintain a respectable public image while carrying on his relationship with Hepburn behind closed doors. Hepburn, for her part, accepted this arrangement, never publicly acknowledging their relationship during Tracy's lifetime and keeping a respectful distance at his funeral out of deference to his wife. Kate was extraordinary in how she handled it, noted one friend of the couple. She never demanded marriage or public recognition. She understood the complications of Spencer's situation and accepted that their relationship would always exist in the shadows. But Hepburn wasn't Tracy's only extramarital relationship. Before meeting her, he had affairs with numerous actresses and studio employees. His drinking problems often exacerbated his infidelities, leading to impulsive encounters that were hushed up by the studio. There were incidents, revealed one former MGM employee. Spencer would go on benders, and things would happen. Indiscretions that required studio fixers to step in with payments or threats to keep things quiet. He struggled with tremendous guilt afterward, which only fueled more drinking and, inevitably, more indiscretions. This cycle of behavior reveals the complex psychology behind Tracy's double life. Unlike some of his contemporaries, who cheerfully pursued infidelity without remorse, Tracy seemed tormented by the contradictions between his public image, his religious beliefs, and his private behavior. This internal conflict manifested in his legendary drinking problems and the health issues that eventually claimed his life. Spencer was a man at war with himself, observed one director who worked closely with him. The Catholic guilt, the sense of responsibility toward his son and wife, the genuine love he felt for Kate, the alcoholism that both numbed his guilt and fueled his bad decisions, it all created this perfect storm of self-destruction that he never resolved. The Tracy Hepburn relationship, while genuine in its affection, thus represents something more complicated than a simple love story. It was a relationship built on compartmentalization, secrecy, and a moral compromise that neither party could ever fully reconcile with their public personas or private beliefs.
Come on, let's loosen up. Everybody's watching us.
5. Mickey Rooney, the little man with the big appetite. Mickey Rooney stood just 5 feet 2 inches tall, but his appetite for women was gigantic. The boyish star who won America's heart as Andy Hardy, the wholesome teenager always learning valuable moral lessons, was off-screen one of Hollywood's most notorious womanizers with a record of infidelity that would eventually span 8 marriages and countless affairs. He was 5 feet 2, but his cheating record towered over the rest. Rooney's first major marriage to screen siren Ava Gardner set the pattern that would define his romantic life. Despite pursuing Gardner relentlessly and professing undying devotion, Rooney began cheating almost immediately after their wedding. Gardner, who was only 19 when they married, would was shocked to discover the truth about the man she had wed. "He fooled me completely," Gardner later confided to a friend. "I was a country girl who had no idea what Hollywood men were really like. Mickey would tell me he was going to a business meeting, and then I'd hear from someone that he'd been seen with some girl at a club or hotel. When I confronted him, he would deny everything, right up until the evidence became impossible to ignore." Their marriage lasted just a year, but Rooney's pattern was established. He would fall passionately in love, pursue a woman with grand romantic gestures, marry her with declarations of eternal fidelity, and then almost immediately resume his womanizing ways. Mickey had a system, revealed one longtime MGM employee. On every film set, he would identify potential conquests on the first day, usually extras or minor players who were flattered by his attention. He'd use his stardom as a lure, promising to help their careers. Most knew exactly what he was offering, but enough went along that Mickey was rarely without female company, regardless of which wife was waiting at home. What makes Rooney's behavior particularly notable is the sheer number of marriages it damaged, 8 in total, with each following essentially the same pattern. Wives 2 through 8 all discovered what Ava Gardner had learned. Rooney's vows of fidelity lasted about as long as it took him to spot the next attractive woman. "He would literally be pursuing his next wife while still married to the current one," said one contemporary. "There would be overlap, sometimes extensive overlap. Mickey didn't do gaps between relationships. He needed constant female attention and validation." Rooney himself eventually acknowledged his behavior, though he typically framed it as a search for true love rather than serial philandering. "I was looking for the perfect woman, trying to find my mother again," he wrote in his autobiography, a rationalization that psychologists might have a field day with, but that does little to excuse the trail of broken marriages he left in his wake. Perhaps the most telling aspect of Rooney's infidelities is how they contradicted the wholesome image that made him famous. As Andy Hardy, he portrayed a teenager constantly learning about integrity, honesty, and treating others with respect. Off-screen, he demonstrated none of these qualities in his relationships with women. "The studio worked overtime to maintain Mickey's good boy image," said one publicist from that era. "They suppressed stories about his affairs, paid off women who threatened to go public, and continuously sold the fiction that he was just as wholesome as Andy Hardy. The gap between image and reality couldn't have been wider." By the time he died in 2014 at age 93, Rooney had spent more than 70 years demonstrating that he was incapable of marital fidelity, a dubious record even by Hollywood's permissive standards.
Everything's fixed. I'm in.
Stand up. Take your hat off my desk.
Huh?
Put out that cigarette.
6. Cary Grant, the charmer who couldn't commit. Cary Grant epitomized sophisticated charm on screen. With his impeccable suits, transatlantic accent, and debonair manner, he became the gold standard for the elegant leading man. But behind that perfect facade was a man whose romantic life was characterized by profound confusion, serial infidelity, and a seemingly endless search for a happiness that always seemed just out of reach. His on-screen charm was real, and so was his inability to stay faithful. Grant married 5 times, and each marriage followed a similar pattern: initial passion and devotion, followed by growing distance, followed inevitably by affairs that undermined the relationship. His first wife, actress Virginia Cherrill, discovered this pattern early when Grant's eye began to wander shortly after their wedding in 1934. Cary pursued women the way he pursued success, methodically and with total focus, revealed one contemporary. When he wanted to win a woman, he would pull out all stops: gifts, attention, charm turned up to maximum voltage. But once he won, his interest would begin to fade, and his eye would start roving again. Grant's romantic confusion extended beyond simple infidelity. For years, Hollywood insiders whispered about his unusually close relationship with fellow actor Randolph Scott, with whom he shared a beach house for much of the 1930s. While the exact nature of their relationship has been debated for decades, what's clear is that Grant's sexuality appeared more complex than his carefully constructed public image suggested. "Whether or not Cary and Randy were lovers is something only they knew for certain," said one friend of both actors. "What was obvious to anyone who knew them was that they had a deep bond that transcended ordinary friendship, and that relationship continued even during periods when both were married to women." The studio system worked diligently to suppress any public discussion of Grant's living arrangement with Scott, arranging publicity photos that portrayed them as just two bachelors sharing expenses. Meanwhile, Grant's marriages and affairs with women served to reinforce his heterosexual image to the public. His third marriage, to heiress Betsy Drake, lasted the longest at almost 13 years, but even this relationship was punctuated by Grant's wandering eye. His affair with actress Sophia Loren while filming The Pride and the Passion, 1957, became an open secret in Hollywood, with Grant becoming so infatuated that he reportedly proposed marriage to Loren while still married to Drake. Cary became absolutely obsessed with Sophia, recalled one crew member. He would follow her around the set like a lovesick teenager. Everyone felt uncomfortable witnessing it, especially knowing that his wife was back home, completely unaware that her husband was pursuing another woman so openly. Throughout his career, rumors of Grant's affairs circulated widely within the industry. Connections to actresses, costume designers, studio employees, and society women filled the gossip columns, though always with enough ambiguity to maintain his public image as a romantic ideal rather than a serial philanderer. The studio had an entire team dedicated to managing Cary's image, explained one publicist from that era. Whenever evidence of an affair threatened to emerge, they would immediately plant competing stories, arrange for witnesses to provide alternative explanations, or simply pay for silence. His box office appeal depended on women believing they could be the one to finally capture Cary Grant's heart permanently. The great irony of Grant's career is that he made his name playing men who ultimately committed to the women they loved, while in real life, he seemed incapable of such lasting devotion. The man who represented the romantic ideal for millions of moviegoers was, in reality, constantly searching for a happiness that eluded him until late in life. 7. Robert Mitchum, the bad boy with women in every port. Robert Mitchum cultivated an image of dangerous masculinity that made him a unique star in Hollywood's firmament. With his sleepy eyes, laconic manner, and physical presence that suggested barely restrained violence, Mitchum specialized in anti-heroes and outright villains who fascinated audiences precisely because of their moral ambiguity. Off-screen, his approach to marriage and fidelity was equally ambiguous. He gave the camera that lazy smirk, because he already had someone waiting in his trailer. Mitchum married Dorothy Spence in 1940, and their union would last until his death in 1997, 57 years that, on paper, suggest one of Hollywood's most enduring marriages. The reality, however, was considerably more complicated. While Mitchum maintained his marriage, he also maintained a near-constant series of affairs with co-stars, studio employees, and women he met during his travels. Bob had a philosophy about marriage and fidelity, explained one friend. He believed that what happened on location stayed on location. In his mind, affairs during filming didn't count as real infidelity because they were temporary and happened away from home. It was a convenient rationalization that allowed him to maintain his marriage while never denying himself any pleasure that came his way. This compartmentalization became Mitchum's modus operandi throughout his long career. For decades, it was understood in Hollywood that leading ladies filming with Mitchum would likely become his temporary companions for the duration of the shoot. Some resisted his advances, but many succumbed to his raw charisma and the intensity of his pursuit. He didn't chase women the way other stars did, noted one actress who worked with him. He didn't need to. Bob had this animal magnetism that drew women to him. He would fix those hooded eyes on you, maybe offer a drink in that deep voice, and suddenly you'd find yourself wondering how you'd ended up in his hotel room. He made women feel like the only person in the world when he focused on them. The studio system facilitated Mitchum's behavior, actively working to keep his affairs from becoming public knowledge. When indiscretions threatened to leak to the press, fixers would step in with bribes or threats to ensure silence. Dorothy Mitchum was protected from the worst of the evidence, though friends suggest she wasn't entirely unaware of her husband's activities. Dorothy knew who she had married, said one longtime family friend. She understood Bob's nature and made a decision to accept what she couldn't change. Their arrangement seemed to be, don't embarrass me publicly, be discreet, and always come home. And Bob, for all his wandering, did always come back to Dorothy. There was a core connection there that survived everything else. Mitchum's affairs weren't limited to brief location flings. He allegedly maintained several long-term relationships that ran parallel to his marriage, including a reported multi-year affair with actress Shirley MacLaine that began during the filming of Two for the Seesaw in 1962. Some of Bob's affairs had real substance, revealed one associate. They weren't just physical attractions, but genuine connections. He compartmentalized his life to an extraordinary degree: wife and family in one box, film career in another, and these significant relationships in yet another. Somehow, he managed to keep them all going simultaneously without any seeming to intrude on the others. This emotional compartmentalization aligned perfectly with Mitchum's famous nonchalance about everything in his life. The same man who claimed acting is the easiest job in the world approached his complicated personal life with similar apparent effortlessness, never showing stress about the web of deception he maintained for decades. In later years, as his career slowed down, Mitchum's philandering reportedly decreased as well. He and Dorothy settled into a more conventional marriage, though friends suggest the change had more to do with opportunity and energy than any fundamental shift in Mitchum's approach to fidelity. 8. Warren Beatty, the man who couldn't stop. Warren Beatty represents a bridge between old and new Hollywood, a star whose career began in the waning days of the studio system and continued through the revolutionary changes of the 1960s and 70s. While technically a later-era star, Beatty's approach to women was firmly in the tradition of Golden Age philanderers, though he took the practice to such extremes that he set a new standard for Hollywood womanizing. He wasn't just a ladies' man, he was a one-man dating epidemic. The numbers associated with Beatty's conquests defy belief. According to his biographer Peter Biskind, Beatty slept with approximately 12,775 women over the course of his bachelorhood, a figure that, if accurate, would require averaging more than one new sexual partner per day for 35 years. While the exact count may never be verified, what's undisputed is that Beatty's appetite for women was unprecedented even by Hollywood's permissive standards. Warren approached seduction as a full-time job, recalled one producer who worked with him in the 1960s. He was methodical, relentless, and utterly focused when he had a woman in his sights. I've never seen anyone work so hard at something that came so naturally to him. He could be in the middle of a business meeting, spot an attractive woman, and completely shift his attention to planning his approach. What distinguished Beatty from many of his womanizing predecessors was his willingness to invest whatever time and energy were required to achieve his conquests. Unlike stars who relied primarily on their fame to attract women, Beatty employed elaborate strategies of pursuit tailored to each individual target. Warren studied women like a scientist, explained one former assistant. He would learn everything about a woman he was interested in: her tastes, her past relationships, her vulnerabilities, her ambitions. Then he would craft a persona designed specifically to appeal to her particular needs. It was like watching a method actor preparing for a role, except the role was the perfect man for whoever he was pursuing at the moment. This calculated approach proved remarkably effective, with Beatty's conquests including some of the most beautiful and accomplished women of his era, from actresses like Natalie Wood, Julie Christie, and Diane Keaton, to singers like Carly Simon, who famously immortalized him in You're So Vain, to countless models, journalists, and industry professionals. Beatty's romantic resume reads like a who's who of desirable women from the 1960s through the 1980s. What made Beatty's behavior particularly notable was how it contradicted his on-screen persona in many films. As a producer and actor, he often created projects that portrayed complex, feminist-friendly male characters. Films like Bonnie and Clyde, Shampoo, and Reds suggested a man with nuanced understanding of gender politics, even as his personal behavior reflected old-fashioned objectification of women as conquests. The contradiction between Warren's films and his personal life was striking, observed one colleague. He would champion these sophisticated, progressive screenplays about gender and politics, then walk out of the production meeting and immediately start calculating how to get the new script supervisor into bed. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. Unlike many Hollywood womanizers who continued their philandering ways through multiple marriages, Beatty's story took an unexpected turn. In 1992, at age 54, he married actress Annette Bening and, by all accounts, embraced monogamy with the same intensity he had previously brought to serial conquest. The couple raised 4 children together, and no credible reports of infidelity have emerged in their 3 decades of marriage. Warren's transformation was the most shocking plot twist in Hollywood, joked one longtime friend. No one believed the most notorious womanizer in town could suddenly become a devoted family man, but he proved everyone wrong. It's as if all those years of restless pursuit were leading him to the one woman who could finally hold his complete attention. 9. William Holden, the Golden Boy's dark side. William Holden possessed a unique combination of all-American good looks and world-weary cynicism that made him one of Hollywood's most compelling leading men. Films like Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, and Network showcased his ability to portray complex men struggling with moral compromises. Off-screen, Holden's own moral compromises included a marriage riddled with infidelity and fueled by the alcoholism that would eventually claim his life. His on-screen restraint didn't follow him home. Holden married actress Brenda Marshall in 1941, and their union would last, at least officially, until 1971. But almost from the beginning, Holden's eye wandered, and his position as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars gave him ample opportunity to pursue his extracurricular interests. Bill had affairs on nearly every film he made, revealed one longtime colleague. It became so routine that the crew would start taking bets on which woman from the production would become his location girlfriend. Sometimes it was a leading lady, sometimes a supporting actress, sometimes someone from the crew. The only constant was that there would always be someone. Among Holden's most famous affairs were his relationships with his co-stars Audrey Hepburn, whom he met while filming Sabrina, and Grace Kelly, his co-star in The Bridges at Toko-Ri. Both women were reportedly deeply affected by their relationships with Holden, though both eventually recognized that his inability to commit made any lasting relationship impossible. Audrey might have married Bill if he had been free to marry her, claimed one friend of both actors. She was genuinely in love with him, but he was trapped in his marriage, and his drinking was already becoming problematic. Audrey eventually realized that building a future with him was impossible, no matter how strong their connection was. What complicated Holden's infidelities was his growing dependence on alcohol. As his drinking worsened through the 1950s and 1960s, his behavior became increasingly erratic and self-destructive. What had begun as calculated affairs evolved into impulsive, alcohol-fueled encounters that sometimes led to public embarrassment. When Bill was sober, he was discreet about his affairs, noted one director who worked with him multiple times. He would maintain separate compartments in his life, wife and family in one, film career in another, and his various relationships carefully managed so they didn't intersect. But when he was drinking, which became more and more frequent, all those boundaries would collapse. He'd make calls he shouldn't make, appear places he shouldn't be seen, create scenes that would get back to Brenda. This combination of infidelity and alcoholism created a toxic cycle that damaged both Holden's marriage and his career. As his behavior became more unpredictable, studios became hesitant to cast him, knowing that his drinking might lead to production problems. Meanwhile, his marriage deteriorated into a hollow shell, with Holden and Marshall effectively living separate lives long before their official divorce. They maintained the appearance of a marriage long after the substance was gone, explained one family friend. They would appear together at important events, maintain the family home, present a united front for the sake of their children and his career. But behind closed doors, they were essentially strangers sharing occasional space. The sadness of it was that Bill did care for Brenda. He just couldn't change his behavior, even as he watched it destroy everything of value in his life. After their divorce in 1971, Holden became involved with actress Stephanie Powers, a relationship that would last until his death in 1981. During this period, he made efforts to control his drinking and lead a more stable life, though success was intermittent at best. Even with Powers, whom he genuinely loved, old patterns occasionally resurfaced. Holden's death at age 63, the result of a fall in his apartment while intoxicated, provided a tragic coda to a life marked by tremendous professional success and profound personal struggles. The man whose on-screen characters often grappled with the gap between appearance and reality died alone, a victim of the same contradictions he had so compellingly portrayed throughout his career. 10. John Wayne, the Duke's double standard. John Wayne stands as the quintessential American icon, the cowboy hero whose rugged individualism and uncompromising code of honor defined masculine virtue for generations of moviegoers. Off-screen, however, the Duke's behavior toward women, particularly during his first marriage to Josephine Sands, revealed a man whose personal conduct fell far short of the principles his characters espoused on screen. The Duke didn't just conquer the West, he conquered every set he stepped on. Wayne's first marriage in 1933 came before his breakthrough success in Stagecoach, 1939, but as his star rose throughout the 1940s, his commitment to fidelity quickly disappeared. The handsome actor discovered that his growing fame gave him unprecedented access to willing women, and he took full advantage of the opportunity. Duke had a straightforward approach to infidelity, revealed one longtime friend. He believed that what happened on location stayed on location. And since he was on location for months at a time throughout most of his career, that created a lot of opportunity for extracurricular activities. Wayne's most famous affair during his first marriage was with legendary actress Marlene Dietrich, whom he met while filming Seven Sinners in 1940. Their chemistry was explosive and immediate, leading to a passionate relationship that continued through their second film together, Pittsburgh, in 1942. When Duke and Marlene were together, the temperature on set would rise 10 degrees, recalled one crew member. They barely tried to hide their attraction. Between takes, they would disappear into his trailer or her dressing room, and everyone knew not to disturb them. It was one of Hollywood's most intense affairs. What made Wayne's behavior particularly hypocritical was his public stance on matters of morality and traditional values. Even as he conducted numerous affairs, he portrayed himself as a defender of traditional family structure and criticized what he saw as moral decay in American society. This gap between public preaching and private practice revealed a double standard that Wayne never acknowledged. Duke would give interviews talking about the importance of honor and keeping your word, about traditional marriage and family values, said one publicist who worked with him. Then he'd finish the interview and head straight to the hotel room of whatever woman he was seeing at the moment. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable, but he never seemed troubled by the contradiction. Wayne's first marriage finally ended in 1945, largely due to his serial infidelity. He would marry twice more, to Esperanza Bauer from 1946 to 1954, and to Pilar Paulette from 1954 until his death in 1979. Though his behavior improved somewhat in these later marriages, his tendency to stray never entirely disappeared, especially during the long location shoots that separated him from his wives for months at a time. Each marriage followed a similar pattern, observed one colleague. He would start out completely devoted, then gradually begin to wander as the routine of married life set in. Location shoots became his escape, a separate world where different rules applied. He compartmentalized his life completely. Wayne the family man at home, Wayne the womanizer on set. Perhaps the most telling aspect of Wayne's approach to fidelity was his reaction when confronted with his behavior. Rather than acknowledging any wrongdoing, he would typically become angry and defensive, sometimes suggesting that his nature as a man made such behavior inevitable and even justified. He had this old-fashioned view that men had certain needs that couldn't always be contained within marriage, explained one director who worked with him multiple times. If you questioned that assumption, he would look at you like you were speaking a foreign language. The idea that men should be held to the same standard of fidelity as women simply didn't compute for him. This attitude reflected the era in which Wayne rose to fame, a time when powerful men's infidelities were often overlooked or excused as inevitable, but it also revealed the limitations of Wayne's personal code of honor, which somehow made room for betraying the promises he had made to the women in his life. The gap between Wayne's on-screen persona and his private behavior represents one of Hollywood's most striking contradictions. The man who embodied unwavering principle and moral clarity in films like The Searchers and True Grit was, in his personal life, willing to compromise those very principles whenever it suited his desires.